Rain lashed against the pavement as Damien's car skidded to a stop, but the damage was done. A woman lay motionless, drenched, fragile, pregnant. His pulse pounded. He ruled empires, feared nothing, until now, because as he stared at her, one terrifying thought consumed him. This woman was about to change everything. The city skyline stretched endlessly, a kingdom of glass towers and neon lights. At the top of the tallest one, Damien Blackwood stood in his office, overlooking the world he had conquered. A self-made billionaire, a man who had turned nothing into everything, and he made sure no one forgot it. His perfectly tailored suit hugged his broad shoulders, his Rolex gleamed under the dim lighting, and his ice blue eyes reflected nothing but power. Yet, despite all the wealth, despite all the influence, there was an emptiness inside him. People bowed in his presence. Women threw themselves at him. But none of it mattered. Damien didn't believe in love. He didn't believe in attachments. Love was a weakness. It turned powerful men into fools. Tonight, however, something felt different. A late-night meeting had left him irritated, and now all he wanted was to speed through the city, letting the night air cool his temper. So he left his empire behind, slid into his midnight black Aston Martin, and hit the road. On the other side of the city, Evelyn Carter sat on the cold pavement, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. She had been homeless for months. Each night was a battle between her pride and her hunger. Once she had been a woman with dreams, a woman who believed in love, but life had shattered her illusions. The father of her child, the man she had once trusted, had abandoned her. She had no home, no job, no family, just the tiny life growing inside her, the only reason she still fought. People walked past her without a second glance. Some looked at her with disgust, others with pity. But no one stopped. Tonight, she was especially weak. The hunger, the cold, the exhaustion. It all felt heavier than usual. Her hand rested on her belly. Hold on, little one. Just a little longer. She knew she had to find shelter before the rain started. But as she stood up and stepped onto the street, headlights blinded her. A roar of an engine, tires screeched, and then, impact. Damien didn't see her until it was too late. One moment he was speeding down the road, lost in his thoughts. The next, his heart slammed into his ribs as a figure appeared out of nowhere. He braked hard. The sickening thud of impact echoed through the empty streets. Silence. For a moment, Damien sat there, hands gripping the wheel, pulse hammering. Did he just kill someone? Cursing, he shoved the door open and rushed to the front of the car. There, on the wet pavement, lay a woman. Her dress was torn, her face pale under the dim glow of the streetlights. Strands of honey-brown hair clung to her delicate features, and her arms cradled her swollen belly. Pregnant. A sharp jolt of panic shot through him. Oh, God. Damien dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his fingers to her wrist, still breathing. A strange feeling settled in his chest. He had always been a man who calculated risks, who made decisions based on logic. But right now, something in him cracked. He couldn't just leave her here. Without another thought, Damien scooped her into his arms, holding her closer than he had ever held another soul before. The hospital was eerily quiet at this hour. Damien stood outside the emergency room, arms crossed, his jaw tight. The doctors had rushed the woman inside, and now he was waiting. Why do I care? He had never cared before. About anyone. And yet, when he looked at her, fragile, vulnerable, but somehow still strong, he felt an unfamiliar sensation crawl under his skin. Mr. Blackwood? A doctor approached him. The woman and the baby are stable. Something inside him loosened. But then, the doctor hesitated. She's awake. She asked for you. Damien frowned. Why would she ask for him? Still, his feet carried him toward her room before his mind could catch up. Inside, Evelyn lay on the hospital bed, eyes fluttering open. Her gaze met Damien's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her voice, soft but steady, cut through the silence. "You saved me." Damien shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You stepped in front of my car." Her lips curled into a wry smile. Not exactly the romantic way I imagined meeting a billionaire. He wasn't expecting that. A woman who had just been hit by a car was making jokes. "You're awfully calm for someone who almost died," he remarked. Evelyn's eyes darkened. The humour faded. "I've been close to death before." Something tightened in Damien's chest. This woman, this beggar carrying a child, wasn't just a helpless victim. There was a fire in her, a resilience that intrigued him. A dangerous thought crept into his mind. Who are you, Evelyn Carter? And why do I care? Evelyn Carter had always believed that fate was cruel. She had learned the hard way that people only helped when they expected something in return. So, as she lay in the hospital bed, staring at the infuriatingly handsome billionaire who had saved her, she knew one thing for sure. He wanted nothing to do with her after this. "Are you going to throw me back on the streets now?" she asked, her voice quiet, but laced with defiance. Damien Blackwood leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. His ice-blue eyes studied her, as if trying to unravel a puzzle he had no intention of solving. "I don't owe you anything," he said coolly. "I paid for your medical bills. You're alive. That should be enough." Evelyn nodded, expecting nothing less. Rich men were all the same, but then he surprised her. "Where will you go?" he asked. She hesitated. "That's none of your concern." Something flickered in his expression, something unreadable. For a man who claimed to be indifferent, he sure as hell wasn't acting like it. Then, in the most unexpected moment of her life, Damien let out a slow breath and said, "Come with me." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, as if the decision annoyed him. "You have nowhere to go. I have more rooms in my penthouse than I know what to do with. It'll be temporary just until you figure things out." Evelyn stared at him, waiting for the catch. "What's in it for you?" she asked skeptically. Damien smirked. "Nothing. Except maybe a little less guilt on my conscience," she scoffed. "Billionaires have consciences?" For the first time, his expression softened just slightly. "Apparently I do." Evelyn's instinct screamed at her to say no. Accepting help from a man like him was dangerous. But what choice did she have? For the sake of her unborn child, she swallowed her pride and whispered, "Okay." Evelyn Carter didn't belong here. That was the first thought that hit her as she stepped into Damien's penthouse. It wasn't a home. It was a kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a massive chandelier glittered above her, and everything, from the leather couches to the marble floors, screamed wealth beyond imagination. She felt small, out of place. "Your room is down the hall," Damien said, watching her reaction. "You'll find everything you need inside." Evelyn turned to him, her jaw tight. "I don't need much." His gaze flickered to her worn-out dress and the way she still held her belly protectively. "I know," he said quietly. She hated the sympathy in his voice. "I'll pay you back for this," she insisted. Damien arched a brow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I'll find a job." He let out a humorless chuckle. "You're 8 months pregnant," she glared at him. "That doesn't mean I'm useless." Something in her defiance made his smirk fade. He stepped closer, and for the first time, Evelyn noticed how tall he was, how dangerously intense his presence felt. "You're not useless, Evelyn," he said, his voice lower this time. "But you don't have to fight so hard all the time." Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to men looking at her like this, like she was more than just a beggar. Quickly, she looked away. "I need to rest," she mumbled before retreating to her new room. But even as she closed the door behind her, her heart wouldn't stop racing. Days passed, then a week. Evelyn and Damien's worlds collided in ways neither expected. He was used to control. She was used to survival, and that meant they clashed constantly. "Why are you washing dishes?" Damien demanded one night, walking into the kitchen. Evelyn, standing at the sink, rolled her eyes. "Because I live here, and I don't like feeling like a freeloader." "You're not a freeloader." "Then what am I?" she challenged, turning to face him. Damien's eyes darkened. "A woman who needs help, whether she likes it or not." Evelyn clenched her fists. "I don't need saving." Something in his gaze softened. "Maybe not. But for once, let someone help you." She hated how his voice made her heart stutter. This man, the arrogant, heartless billionaire, was confusing her. One moment he was cold, distant, untouchable. The next he was saying things that made her feel seen. She couldn't afford to fall for him. Not when she knew men like him only cared until they got bored. It happened late at night. Evelyn couldn't sleep, so she wandered to the kitchen, craving something sweet. She was reaching for a jar of cookies when a deep voice behind her said, "Stealing from your host?" She jumped, spinning around to see Damien standing in the doorway. "Jesus, do you always sneak up on people?" She scowled. He smirked. "Only when it's entertaining." Evelyn rolled her eyes and grabbed a cookie. She expected him to leave, but instead, he leaned against the counter, watching her. "Do you always eat at midnight?" he asked. She took a bite and shrugged. "Do you always stare at people while they eat?" Something warm and dangerous flashed in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them shifted. Evelyn was aware of how close he was, how the dim kitchen lights made his features look softer, how he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely Damien. He reached forward, his fingers grazing her chin as he wiped away a crumb she hadn't noticed. She froze. His touch was light, barely there, but it set fire to her skin. "You had something here," he murmured. Her breath hitched. Their eyes locked. For the first time, Evelyn saw something in his gaze that wasn't indifference, something that made her heartbeat thunder in her chest. And just like that, the moment was gone. Damien stepped back, clearing his throat. "Get some rest, Evelyn." And then, without another word, he walked away. Evelyn stood there, heart racing, hands still tingling where he had touched her. This was dangerous. She couldn't fall for him, but God help her, she already was. Evelyn Carter was playing a dangerous game. She told herself, "Don't fall for him." But every time Damien Blackwood so much as looked at her with those unreadable ice blue eyes, her resolve cracked. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not about him. He was the kind of man who had never known struggle, the kind of man who had women falling at his feet, the kind of man who wouldn't think twice before walking away when things got complicated. And she? She was pregnant, homeless, and completely unworthy of him. Yet, something about Damien confused her. When he accidentally brushed past her, when their eyes met across the room, when he spoke to her in that low, quiet voice that made her skin tingle, it felt like he saw something in her that no one else did. And that scared her more than anything. Because Damien Blackwood was not a man you could afford to love. The tension between them only grew. Damien, who never let anyone get close, found himself watching Evelyn too much. He told himself it was because she was unpredictable, because she was stubborn and infuriating. Not because of the way she bit her lip when she was nervous. Not because of the way her laugh, soft and rare, made something tighten in his chest. Not because every time she looked at him with those fierce brown eyes, he wanted to know every damn secret she was hiding. One night he found her on the balcony staring at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stepping beside her. Evelyn flinched slightly but didn't turn away. "The baby kicks a lot at night." Damien hesitated. "Can I?" Her eyes widened slightly, but after a moment she nodded. Slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, Damien placed his palm on her belly. He expected it to feel strange, foreign, but when he felt the tiny movement, something inside him shattered. He had never cared about children, never thought about having a family, But this was life, a piece of her. And for the first time, Damien Blackwood felt something deeper than attraction. Evelyn must have sensed the shift because she quickly pulled away. "You shouldn't get attached," she whispered. Damien clenched his jaw. "Why not?" She didn't answer, just turned away, leaving him with a storm brewing in his chest. Damien was never a man who let things go. He saw the way Evelyn tensed every time he mentioned the father of her child. He saw the flicker of pain behind her eyes. And Damien Blackwood hated secrets. One evening as they sat across from each other at dinner, he finally asked, "Who is he?" Evelyn froze mid-bite. "Who?" "You know who," he said, voice calm but sharp. "The man who left you." Her grip on the fork tightened. "It doesn't matter." "It does." "Why?" she demanded, eyes flashing. "Why do you care?" Damien leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Because every time I look at you, I see someone who's been hurt in ways she won't talk about, and I want to know why." Evelyn sucked in a sharp breath. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she set down her fork and whispered, "Liam Hunter." Damien's jaw locked. She didn't have to say more. He could already picture it. The lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak. "He promised me forever," Evelyn continued, her voice hollow, "told me I was his world. And then, the moment I told him I was pregnant, he left." Damien's hands curled into fists. "Where is he now?" Evelyn gave a bitter smile. "Married to a woman with more money and no baggage." Damien felt something dangerously close to rage. He had seen betrayal before. But imagining Evelyn, strong, fierce Evelyn, being discarded like she was nothing, that made his blood boil. He reached across the table, grasping her hand. "You deserved better." Evelyn swallowed, her eyes glistening. "That's what people say when they don't have to live with the scars." Damien squeezed her fingers. "Then let me prove it to you." And in that moment, something shifted between them. That night, Damien couldn't sleep. He found himself standing outside Evelyn's door, his mind racing. He wanted to protect her, but more than that, he wanted her. Not in the fleeting, meaningless way he had wanted other women. This was different. She had invaded his mind, his thoughts, his very existence, and that realization terrified him. Just as he was about to walk away, Evelyn's door opened. She gasped slightly, surprised to see him standing there. Damien? For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The tension between them was electric. She was standing so close, barefoot, wearing one of his oversized shirts that swallowed her frame. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves. And God, she had never looked more beautiful. "Evelyn," Damien murmured, his voice lower than he intended. Something flickered in her eyes. She didn't move, didn't run, and neither did he. Slowly, Damien reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, tracing the soft curve of her jaw. "You drive me insane," he whispered. Evelyn's breath hitched. "Then why are you here?" "Because no matter how much I try, I can't stay away from you." The space between them disappeared. For a moment it felt like something inevitable was about to happen. But then, Evelyn stepped back. Her eyes held conflicted emotions. "This isn't a good idea," she murmured. Damien's jaw tightened. He should walk away. He should let her go. But as he looked into her eyes, he made a decision. "I'm not giving up on you, Evelyn." And with that, he walked away, leaving her breathless. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Damien's words replayed in her head. "I'm not giving up on you, Evelyn." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that he was different. But experience had taught her otherwise. Men made promises. Men broke them. She placed a hand on her belly, whispering, "We can't afford to get hurt again, little one." But her body betrayed her. Every time Damien looked at her, touched her, even in the smallest ways, she felt it. The attraction was undeniable, a fire that refused to die, and it was dangerous. because she wasn't sure how much longer she could resist him. The next morning, Evelyn tried to avoid Damien, but avoiding a man like Damien Blackwood was impossible. She walked into the living room only to find him sitting there, shirtless, fresh from his workout, his muscles flexed as he took a sip of coffee, his skin glistening slightly. Evelyn froze. "Oh, hell." "You're staring," Damien murmured without looking up. Evelyn snapped out of it. "I am not," he smirked. "You definitely are." She scowled, snatching an apple from the counter. "I've seen better." He raised a brow, clearly amused. "Liar." She huffed and turned away, but before she could leave, he was behind her, too close. "Why do you keep running from me, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. She swallowed hard. "Because this is a mistake." Damien reached out, his fingers lightly grazing her arm. A spark shot through her. "Then tell me you don't feel it," he challenged. "Tell me you don't want this." Evelyn clenched her fists. "I can't afford to want this." Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked dangerously close to hurt. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "Because you'll leave, Damien. Just like everyone else." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, Damien did something unexpected. He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheek. "I'm not Liam," he said, his voice raw. "And I'm not leaving." Her breath hitched. Oh, God. Because for the first time in a long time, she wanted to believe someone. Evelyn didn't know who moved first. All she knew was that suddenly, Damien's lips were on hers. The kiss wasn't soft, it wasn't hesitant, it was fierce, demanding. A wildfire igniting everything in its path. Evelyn gasped against his mouth, and that was all the invitation he needed. His hands slid down her back, pulling her closer than she thought possible. She melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. For the first time in months, she felt alive. But then, a knock on the door. They broke apart, both breathing heavily. Damien looked pissed. "Who the hell?" Before he could finish, the butler stepped in, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, there's someone here to see Miss Carter." Evelyn frowned. "Who?" The butler hesitated. "Liam Hunter." The world stopped. Damien went completely still. Evelyn's blood ran cold. No, not now. Not when everything was finally starting to make sense, but Damien's expression had already darkened. He turned to Evelyn, his voice dangerously calm. "Do you want to see him?" She swallowed hard. Before she could answer, Damien was already walking toward the door, his entire body radiating fury. And Evelyn knew. This wasn't going to end well. Liam Hunter stood in the doorway smirking, the same charming, deceitful smirk that had once made Evelyn fall in love. Now, it made her sick. "Hello, love," Liam said smoothly. "Miss me?" Damien stepped between them. "If you value your life, you'll turn around and leave," Damien said, his voice ice cold. Liam chuckled. "Easy there, big guy. I'm just here to talk." He looked at Evelyn then, his gaze sweeping over her belly. "So," he drawled, "still carrying my kid, huh?" Damien's fist clenched. Evelyn felt like she couldn't breathe. Liam had no right to act like he cared, no right to show up now after all this time. "What do you want, Liam?" she forced out. Liam sighed dramatically. "Come on, love. You didn't actually think I'd let you raise my child alone, did you?" Evelyn's stomach twisted. "You don't care about this baby." Liam grinned. "Number. But the press would love to know that the heir to the Hunter fortune is out there." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. That's why he was here. Not because he wanted her. Not because he cared. Because he had realized that the baby was an asset. Damien must have seen the terror in her eyes because he grabbed her hand. "You're not going anywhere with him," Damien said. Liam smirked. "That's not up to you, is it?" Evelyn's heartbeat pounded. She knew Liam. He wouldn't just walk away. And suddenly she realized she needed Damien. Not just for protection. Not just because of what they had. Because for the first time in a long time, She trusted him. That night, Evelyn sat by the window, watching the city lights. Damien had been quiet since Liam left. Too quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Do you want to go back to him?" Evelyn turned to him, shocked. "What?" "You have a choice," he said stiffly. "I won't force you to stay." Her chest tightened. Did he really think she would choose Liam over him? She got up slowly, walking toward him. "You idiot," she whispered. Damien frowned. "What?" Evelyn took a deep breath. And then she kissed him. This time it wasn't desperate. It was soft, certain. When she pulled away, Damien's eyes were wide. "I choose you," she whispered. And just like that, everything changed. Evelyn hadn't meant to kiss Damien. But the moment their lips met, she knew it was inevitable. Every stolen glance, every lingering touch, every whispered argument, it had all been leading to this. She had spent months running from love, from the idea of trust, but Damien had changed everything. When she pulled away, her breath was shaky. Damien stared at her, his usually unreadable face filled with something she had never seen before. Something raw. "Evelyn." His voice was rough, low. She bit her lip, her heart racing. "Tell me you feel it too." Damien exhaled sharply. Then, without another word, he kissed her again. This time it was slow, deep. A kiss that spoke of all the things he couldn't say out loud. "I want you. I need you. I'm falling for you." When they finally pulled apart, Damien cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that," he admitted. Evelyn smiled softly. "Then why did you wait?" His jaw tightened. "Because I knew once I had you, I wouldn't be able to let go." Her breath hitched. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to be let go. The next few days felt different. Damien wasn't just the arrogant billionaire anymore. He was something more. He woke up early just to bring Evelyn breakfast. He touched her more, absent-mindedly brushing her hand, fixing her hair. He even read books about pregnancy, though he would never admit it. And Evelyn? She let herself hope. She let herself believe. But deep down, she knew. The past wasn't done with her yet. It happened unexpectedly. Evelyn had gone out for a walk just to clear her head. She was only a few steps from Damien's penthouse when a black car pulled up beside her, and before she could react, strong arms grabbed her. She screamed, struggling, but the man shoved her into the car. The door slammed shut. The locks clicked. Panic clawed at her throat. And then Liam Hunter smirked at her from the driver's seat. "Miss me, love." Damien knew something was wrong the moment Evelyn didn't return. She wasn't answering her phone. His gut twisted with cold, raw fear. Then his phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. "If you want her back, come alone. You know where to find me." Damien's blood turned to ice. Liam. His hands clenched into fists. That bastard. Without hesitation, Damien grabbed his car keys. He didn't think. Didn't hesitate. Because if anything happened to Evelyn, he would burn the whole damn world down. Damien stormed into the abandoned warehouse. Liam was waiting, sitting casually on a chair, Evelyn beside him, her wrists tied. The moment Damien saw her, something inside him snapped. "If you've hurt her," Damien growled, stepping forward, "I will kill you." Liam chuckled. "Relax, mate, she's fine." "For now." Evelyn's eyes pleaded with Damien. "Don't—" But Damien was done playing games. "You want money?" he asked coldly. "Is that it?" Liam smirked. "Tempting, but no. I want the woman. And the kid." Damien saw red. "Over my dead body," he snarled. Liam stood up. "That can be arranged." And then he pulled out a gun. Evelyn gasped. But Damien? He didn't even flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, completely fearless. "Go ahead," he taunted. "Shoot me." Liam's smirk faltered. "What? You heard me." Damien's voice was like ice, deadly, dangerous. "Shoot me, Liam, but I promise you, if I go down, you're coming with me." Liam hesitated. For the first time, he looked afraid. And in that split second, Damien moved. With lightning speed, he punched Liam across the face. The gun clattered to the floor. Evelyn screamed as the two men fought, brutal, unforgiving. Damien's knuckles bled. Liam's face was a mess of bruises. But Damien didn't stop. Not until Liam was on the ground, groaning in pain. Breathing heavily, Damien grabbed the gun and pointed it at Liam's head. "Damien, no!" Evelyn cried. Damien's hands shook. He wanted to pull the trigger. God, he wanted to. But then Evelyn touched his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "You're not like him." Damien's jaw tightened, and slowly he lowered the gun. Because she was right. He wasn't a killer, but he would protect her no matter what. Police sirens rang in the distance. Liam was finished. And Evelyn. She was finally free. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood by the window of Damien's penthouse, watching the sunset. Liam was in jail, and for the first time in forever, she felt safe. Damien walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How are you feeling?" he murmured against her hair. She smiled, leaning into him. "Happy." Damien turned her around, his blue eyes filled with something deep, something real. "I meant what I said, Evelyn." She looked up at him, heart racing. "Which part?" He cupped her face. "I'm not going anywhere." Tears filled her eyes. Because for the first time she believed him, and when Damien kissed her, slow, passionate, full of promise, she knew. This wasn't just love. This was forever. Epilogue. Love. Always. A few months later, Evelyn held a tiny newborn baby girl in her arms. Damien sat beside her, his eyes filled with pure awe. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Evelyn smiled. "She has your eyes." Damien gently ran a finger over the baby's cheek. Then, looking at Evelyn, he said the words she never thought she would hear. "Marry me." Tears slipped down her face. "Damien, no more excuses," he murmured. "No more fears, just us. You, me, and our daughter." Evelyn laughed through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000,000 times. "Yes." And as Damien kissed her, holding both her and their child, Evelyn finally understood. Some love stories were written in fate. And this was theirs.